Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Jenny Miller with PESI Publishing and Bridge City Books, and I'm happy to introduce Liz Kelly. She's the author of This Book is Cheaper Than Therapy, a no-nonsense guide to improving your mental health, which officially released on March 19th, so about 3 weeks ago. Thanks so much for being here, Liz.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to get to talk to you today.
Me too. And I can't believe it's already been 3 weeks since launch. I feel like it's just been a whirlwind, and I'm so happy to see all the positive feedback we've gotten so far.
Yeah, it's been really exciting. Those 3 weeks have gone by in a blur.
Yeah, for sure. So, obviously with this title, This Book is Cheaper Than Therapy, we're PESI Publishing / Bridge City Books. We got a lot of therapists in our audience. Let's just address the elephant in the room. This book is cheaper than therapy. It's not meant to replace therapy in any way, shape, or form. But Liz, could you just take a few minutes to talk about why you wrote this book? Like what kind of spurred this idea?
Absolutely. I am incredibly pro therapy. I think therapy is magic. I think everyone should give it a try at some point or another, or whenever is necessary. I am absolutely a huge proponent of therapy because, of course, I'm a therapist. But I wrote this book because I know it's not that easy for everyone to be able to access therapy. Therapy can be really expensive. Many people don't have mental health benefits in their insurance plan. If they have insurance, sometimes I'm from Illinois originally. I live in the DC area now, but in small town Illinois, there aren't a lot of therapists when I grew up, but I didn't know anyone who was a therapist. And so there's some parts of the country where there just aren't adequate mental health services. And also some people know that their mental health isn't the greatest, but there might actually be a lot of things that they can do on their own before giving therapy a try, or even to supplement their therapy treatment. And so that was my motivation for writing the book. I make it clear on the first page that this isn't a substitute for therapy, that if you're in crisis or if you're having trouble with the activities of your daily life, that you should absolutely seek mental health treatment. And the last chapter of my book is actually a guide to how do you do that? Where can you go? What are the options? What questions do you ask to potential therapists? And so I really want this to be a book for someone who's curious about improving their mental health. And also it will give them the tools to be able to take the next steps forward should they decide they need additional support.
For sure. And I want to touch on something that you said about, the cost barriers, because I think it was like over 40% of Americans don't have access to mental health care because of cost barriers, which is like an overwhelming amount of people. And I feel like even though therapy has like come a long way, in terms of the stigma behind it, I feel like that's still a thing, especially with like older generations. Like my parents definitely gave me a look when I told them that I got a therapist, and they're like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "No, I'm good. Everyone should do this." But, it's such a good point that like there are so many people that I know that are like, "Yeah, I've struggled with anxiety. Yeah, I have depression, but it's not that bad. Like, I don't need to go, find a whole therapist."
Right.
And then there's like the whole thing of like finding the therapist is such a thing. Like, I know that there's, resources like therapist.com, Psychology Today, where you can like, look up a list of therapists in your area, see if they accept your insurance, but then you still have to reach out to them. And most of the time they're not accepting new clients, or, they only do telehealth, and maybe you don't think you'll respond to telehealth, or, something like that. It's just so hard to find the right situation, like the therapist that you vibe with, which is what we talk about on the back of the book a lot.
Exactly. That actually the number one predictor of whether or not therapy is going to be successful is the relationship that you have, that the therapist and the client have. So you have to feel comfortable with your therapist. You have to feel like they get you. You have to feel safe with them, because if you don't have those things, it's just not going to work. So it's incredibly important to find a good fit with your therapist. And I might take this as an opportunity to just say that if you meet with a therapist for a few sessions and you don't feel like it's a good fit, you can talk to your therapist about that and say, I just am not sure about this fit. And, the therapist might be able to adapt their approach and to improve your work together. Or you might find that you might benefit from switching to someone else. And that's okay. It's okay to keep searching until you find the right person.
Right. And I also feel like this book is something that, therapists can actually use with their clients. Like you cover so much ground in this book. Obviously, again, nothing will replace, sessions with a trained professional, right? But you cover so many things: taming your inner critic, setting boundaries, navigating grief. Like how do you see a clinician potentially using this book alongside their client care?
Right. Well, this is essentially my version of mental health 101. I
Mhm.
was thinking a lot about the younger version of myself when I was writing this book. And I was like, what did that person need to know? So, someone who has read they might be familiar with some of these concepts. But if you haven't really delved into mental health, this is a great way to get an overview of the things that I talk about with my clients every day. So, one of the things about experiencing intense emotions is that when your emotional reactivity goes up, your ability to problem solve, your ability to be creative, your ability to take action goes way down. So, what I try to do with my clients is to give them the tools to be able to find ways to regulate their emotions and regulate their nervous system so that
Mhm.
then they can take the next steps to do things like develop action plans and to talk to themselves differently and make positive change in their life. And so this book is written in a way where the first chapter is about self-care, the second chapter is about the mind body connection and taming the inner critic. And so, once you've gained those skills, then you can start looking into, okay, how do I set boundaries? How do I improve my relationships? How do I look at the losses I've experienced and be able to recognize and acknowledge those losses and be able to cope with them? And so all of these topics they might be ways that you can talk to your therapist and say, I'm reading this book and there's a chapter on grief. And I realized I haven't acknowledged the fact that when I moved, to a new city, that was a huge loss for me. Or when I got divorced, or when I went through that breakup, or when I had my first kid and I'm now mourning the loss of my independence. There's so many losses that we experience. And so this book is really meant to help you think about these different areas and to gain awareness so that you can decide that oh, I need to learn more about boundaries. I need to learn more about grief. It's kind of a launching pad.
Yeah, for sure. And I always think about people that, there's a lot of people, I'm not saying me, but I am saying me, that like kind of really enjoy that instant gratification of just like, I want to learn something. How can I learn it now? Instead of having to like go to a whole therapist's office and like sit down and do the thing, which is obviously like part of it. But I feel like in reading a book like this, it would make me want to take that next step. Like you said, I think it would just kind of help me build, the confidence to, like, as you're reading it, you start making connections, like you said, that you never even like put together before. And then you're like, okay, I actually have these issues that I need to maybe talk through with a professional. And it's like, I find it to be the perfect complement to traditional therapy, but it can also stand alone. There's going to be people that no matter what you tell them, they're never going to go to therapy. For example, my dad's never going to go to therapy. I hope he's not watching this. He needs to go. Like, everyone should
Yeah,
go if they can,
for
but like
sure. But some
there's
people
so
just aren't
much.
going to do it. It's
Yeah,
it's so
they're so
hard. And
stubborn. So,
yeah,
at
and if
the very
yeah,
least, they can pick this up and start to feel better right away. And I think that's what I
right.
love about it so much. Also, it's so, one thing that sets this book apart for me is that it's so conversational and so relatable and hilarious. And you kind of share your own stories in there. So it feels like talking with a friend who happens to be a therapist, and I think I'm so glad that you took that approach instead of just like keeping it almost like really clinical and like dry, because it's not meant to be an encyclopedia of common issues you may experience. It's meant to be like your tool, your friendly tool that you can count on whenever you're not feeling well. You can come back to it at any time. There are sections that you can revisit when you need them. There are sections you can ignore until you need them. I love that. And is that kind of how you envisioned it from the get-go?
For sure. I find personally that I always learn best when I'm laughing or when I find something, funny or interesting, or when I hear someone else's anecdote. That really helps me take in information. And so when I was writing this book, I wanted to make sure that I used humor. And I'm also a big believer that improving your mental health, there are times where it's going to be extremely challenging and uncomfortable and difficult, and you may experience sadness and whole range of emotions that aren't easy. But I also believe that there can be some really fun things about improving your mental health, being able to, talk to yourself differently and take pride in what you're doing, and to feel proud and to be excited about the future and to have more meaning in your day-to-day life. I think improving your mental health can be a lot of fun. And so I wanted that sense of fun to come through when I was writing this book.
That's so true. There's, the chapter on taming your inner critic, I feel like really exemplifies that, because it can be so hard to like listen to yourself, rag on yourself over and over again. And I read, resources on how to, quiet that voice, but turning it into like almost a comedic thing, like you call your inner critic Nelson, like, shut up, Nelson. I'm
Right.
doing something. Get out of here, Nelson. And I feel like that's almost like that kind of sarcastic tone really resonates with a lot of people, especially those that have like a darker sense of humor, which is a lot of people. But I
Yeah.
love that. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, no, I found that like once I gave my inner critic a name, all of a sudden when I started pushing back against that voice in my head, it's now was kind of funny. And I could finally hear like, oh my gosh, like the way my inner critic is awful, So once I started being like, Nelson, I'm doing the best I can, it started to click a little bit. And so that was something I put in the book, and in terms of teaching self-compassion and figuring out new ways to talk to yourself in a way that's going to be more beneficial.
Well, and I just out of curiosity, I know that you're still seeing clients. Like, have you talked about the book? Have they read it? Has anyone kind of given you any feedback there?
Yeah, I have given out copies to my clients, and it's been really fun to, hear their responses. And I love helping my clients pick out a name for their inner critic. So that's been that's really fun to hear
That's
that,
so
hear
neat.
the choices that they make, and so it's been great. And it's also been really nice too, because sometimes they'll say like, I was reading that chapter on grief, or I was reading that chapter on emotional regulation, and it made me think of this, and it provides um, a a starting point for our conversation
Yeah,
together.
no kidding. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you could pick, say someone wants to, they're on a waiting list for a clinician and they're like, I just want to feel better now. What's like one of your favorite, easy to learn kind of practices that they can incorporate right away?
That's a great question. So one of the things I like to recommend to anyone who is wanting to get into therapy and or wanting to feel better, wanting to improve their mental health, is to not is to avoid neglecting the basics, right? I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but things like sleep and moving your body and nutrition and getting outside. I mean, we're all basically, houseplants with feelings, right? Like we
Right.
need these things. And
Yeah.
so I would suggest doing an audit and really hone in on, what is my day-to-day life looking like? What would my ideal day look like? And, once you can identify what your ideal day would look like, maybe, don't try to overhaul everything all at once. That's going to be too much and might lead to frustration, but try to maybe pick one piece of that ideal day and try to incorporate that into your life. So, for example, if you're like, on my ideal day, I would wake up and I would go for a walk around the block.
Mhm.
Maybe try that one thing, or maybe it's I need to go to bed a little bit earlier, or I need to charge my phone in another room at night so I'm not tempted to scroll or to doom scroll
Right.
before bed. So really focusing on these basics is so important. I mean, I could be the best therapist in the world with all the new interventions and all these new strategies, but if you're sleep deprived, that's not going to do anything. And so the basics are really incredibly important.
I have this like little checklist that I go by, and it's like if I'm ever in a bad mood or not having a good day, I'm like, have I eaten? Have I had water? Have I seen the sun? Have I been outside? Like, have I slept? All those things. And it's insane. Like once you start getting consistent about those basic needs, like you do just feel a little bit better. It doesn't cure
Right.
all your problems, but like your baseline is solid. And then you're like, okay, I'm ready. I have energy to tackle on these other issues. So I love that tip.
Absolutely. And that was something you mentioned earlier. When you're thinking about therapy and you're stressed out or you're feeling down or you're feeling anxious, tasks that maybe at another point in time might feel really easy can feel really hard. So things
Super
like
overwhelming.
like going to a database and searching through therapist profiles or making those phone calls or sending those emails. If you're feeling down or stressed or overwhelmed, that can be incredibly hard. And so, this book might be an entry point for you to kind of take that baby step into, okay, what are some simple strategies I can start doing? If I can feel a little bit better, then maybe I can do a little bit more.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, Liz, it looks like we're out of time for today, but thanks again for joining. I really appreciate you hopping on. I know you have tons of other interviews that you're getting ready for. And thank you everyone for watching. If you want to get your copy of This Book is Cheaper Than Therapy, it's available wherever books are sold, including PESIpublishing.com. And there should be a QR code here, I think, on the screen. And if not, you can go to the link, pesipubs.com/cheaper than therapy and get your copy. Thanks,
Yeah.
Liz.
So nice talking with you.
All right, everyone, have a great day.